Hello everyone and welcome to Pete Saunders in the studio on powerextraradio.co.uk. So welcome to everybody that's on Facebook Live, and I'm just going to switch you around so you can see Pete. Oh, can't see Pete's head. There he goes.
A sweaty Pete today.
Sweaty Pete today. Well, it is very hot, Pete, isn't it? So I'm having to hold my phone in my hand so we can all see Pete because he's too tall for my setup here. So, Pete, the Breaking the Cycle radio show is all about understanding victim and survivors' adversity, understanding what aspirations they may have had and how child abuse has impacted their aspirations, and people that come into the studio or phone into the studio, what achievements that they've managed or not because they are a survivor of childhood abuse. So we'll be speaking about all of those things over the next hour and a half that you're with us. So please, can you just introduce yourselves to everybody and let everyone know who you are, and don't go into too much detail straight away.
Okay, well, I'm Pete Saunders, as Chris said. I'm the founder of a charity called NAPAC, which is National Association for People Abused in Childhood. We have a free phone number if you're a survivor. We have a free phone number that I'll give out later. I am a survivor of childhood abuse, as Chris said, and in addition to my duties with NAPAC, I also sit with Chris on the Victims and Survivors Consultative Panel to the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, which you probably all know about, and I'm involved with a number of other bodies. The most recent and perhaps one of the most exciting bodies that I'm involved with is ECA, which stands for Ending Clergy Abuse, and again there is a website, ecaglobal.org. That's ecaglobal.org, ecaglobal.org. Very exciting stuff.
And again, I'm going to ask you about all of that because a lot of people don't know about what you do, how you started, the challenges along the way, and the challenges that we all face now, really, in the provision of specialist services to victims and survivors of childhood abuse, mental, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. So it's really interesting I think, to make people aware, whether they're victims, survivors, or supporters, to just make everybody aware out there how hard it is and how challenging it is to actually say, hi, I am a survivor in the first place, to admit to everybody around you how you are impacted about what we've gone through, and then to actually go ahead and put a service in place to help other victim survivors. How challenging and how hard that is for a survivor of what we've gone through to actually do. And I think, once people understand that more, then maybe they will come forward and offer their support in whatever way they can, and offer help to people like you that have used their adversity to help other people. So that's what I really want to bring about today, Pete, is to make people understand that there is life after abuse, however challenging it is. And if we survivors don't stick up for what we believe in and what we see needs changing, then who else is actually going to do it? Because I haven't got the understanding, in my opinion. Do you agree with that or not?
Well, I do, and I also agree that child abuse in all its forms, sexual, physical, emotional, you name it, is still very much a taboo in our society. It's something that most people find very difficult to talk about, and it's certainly something that many survivors of these crimes find it immensely difficult to talk about and to come forward. And we would never say to those people, you must come forward, because it's easy to say, but it's a lot harder to do. But Chris is also absolutely spot on when she says that there is a dearth of support services for people like me, which was one of the reasons that I set up NAPAC many years ago, which was simply to help other survivors like myself. And at that point, from thinking I was the only one in the world that it had happened to, I discovered that there are actually millions of us that suffered similar fates in our childhood.
But Pete, that's one of the things that keeps, I think, people silent, is because we think that we are the only the only ones, don't we, that have suffered this abuse. And as you've just said, we are not the only ones that have suffered this abuse. There's thousands and hundreds of thousands of us in the UK, around the country, and around the world. And I want to come on to speaking to you about your work that you do around the world in a little while. But could you, if you wish, just tell us a little bit of what happened to you, not in detail, but just generally, so that people will get that you get what victims and survivors go through?
Sure. Well, I am a survivor of childhood abuse, and I don't need to go into any detail, but when I was a little boy, I was abused by a family member, as many survivors are. I was also abused by the head teacher of my primary school, who it turns out was a serial abuser of children. I found that out many years later. And then at my secondary school, I was also sexually assaulted by two Roman Catholic priests. So I suppressed the desire, if you like, to deal with that for all my early years, and I didn't speak of the crimes that were committed against me until I was actually in my late 30s. So it was, in common with many other survivors of these crimes, I kept silent. I kept it a secret for more than 20 years before I actually disclosed. And once I disclosed, the floodgates opened, and I realised, as I said earlier, that I'm just one of millions that have suffered these vile crimes at the hands of others when I was a small child.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people actually resonate with that, because we know that just sitting on the Victim and Survivors Consultative Panel in that role, and our roles in the organisations that we run, that victim and survivors are telling us all the time that they felt disempowered as a child to speak up, and they, as an adult, they feel empowered to speak up. Not everybody, but many that come forwards and disclose when they're an adult actually say that is when they do disclose, because that is when they feel that they've got the power back to actually speak up. So when did you start NAPAC, and why did you start NAPAC? What happened in your brain to think that's needed?
Again, good question, and it goes back to starting NAPAC goes back to 1995. So I think that's 23 or 24 years ago. It'll be coming up for 24 years this year, and it was the death of my dad, somebody who I loved dearly, and somebody who I only sadly got really close to in the weeks and days before he passed away. When he died, there was a sense of liberation. I can't explain it, but I felt maybe again, this is something that many survivors tell us, that they kind of protect their parents sometimes from the truth about things for all sorts of complex reasons. But when my father died, I felt I needed to speak out. That coincided with, and again, I'm repeating what we hear very, very often at NAPAC. It coincided with looking at my own children, who were pretty much the same age that I was when I was first attacked as a child. And I stress attacked because this is what happens, even if it's done in a very gentle way. It's still an attack, an assault, and a vile crime. So I realised then just the enormity of what had happened to me. My thoughts were, if somebody did to my children what had actually been done to me, I've said this again many times as well, I'd probably be talking to you from prison radio now, because I would kill people that did to me if they did that to my own children. And I think that's a sentiment most decent parents would identify with. We are supposed to protect our children, and it's ironic, as I said, that by not speaking out, I felt that in a way I was trying to maybe subconsciously protect my parents, because they had failed to protect me as a child, even though they didn't know what was going on. So it wasn't actually their fault. But very quickly, after that revelation, if you like, and after the death of my dad, towards the tail end of 1995, I looked for help. For me, I looked for somebody to speak to. I spoke to some really nice people, but nobody who had a clue about how they could help me as a hurting survivor, male survivor. There was no national helpline. There was no local helpline. There was absolutely nothing that I could find. There were one or two very, very localised services that were very transitional. They weren't in any sense permanent. But I recognised that there was a need for some kind of national focus, a little bit like, I have to say, a bit like Childline is a focus for children who have problems, somewhere that they can turn to for help. So that was the beginning of thinking about NAPAC, and I wrote to all sorts of individuals and organisations, including Childline, and I got one of the most supportive responses was from the management at Childline to say, set up what you're proposing, because we at Childline hear from a lot of adult survivors of childhood abuse, and that is not our remit. So it was clear very early on that there was a need for a free phone, confidential, safe, national helpline, and that's NAPAC's support line today. It's not big, we still need more people, we still need more funding and more volunteers, but we are helping thousands of people every year to come to terms with things that should never have happened to them.
And how? What are the hours of your helpline? When are they open?
The helpline is open 5 days a week. It's open Monday to Friday. Monday to Thursday, it's open from 10 in the morning till 9 in the evening. And then on Friday, we let our people go home a bit earlier, and so it opens again at 10 o'clock, but it closes at 6 o'clock on a Friday. We would love to provide longer hours. We would love to provide a 24-hour service, and we've often talked about this, but there is massive funding and staffing implications for that, and NAPAC doesn't live in that sort of world of money, unfortunately. Otherwise, we would love to have around-the-clock service for survivors.
Would you, obviously, I think that your helpline is manned by a lot of survivors, isn't it? What percentage would you say the helpline's manned by?
I wouldn't like to say, because one thing we don't do is we don't ask people to declare whether they are a survivor or not. What we want to know is whether or not they understand the issues and whether they can help people. If they can satisfy that they can do that, then in a sense it doesn't matter whether they are a survivor or not. What I would say from my many years, and we've had the helpline running now for quite some years, my experience is that many of the people who answer the calls are themselves survivors, but we don't encourage them to share that with callers, because the call is about the caller, not about our people. Our people are well trained, well supported, and they understand the issues, which is why they are able to help people as they do every day.
And if a survivor that's out there listening wanted to get involved, how would they get in touch with you and make that happen? What would be expected of them? What training would you provide? What does that look like?
Well, we used to have the support line, the free phone number, based in two call centres, one in the north and one in the south, one being London, one being Stockport and Greater Manchester. The charity made a decision to consolidate the line just to the northern Stockport office, which is where it is based at the moment. So people who want to get involved with volunteering on the helpline, and we always welcome people who come forward, and we're training people now as I speak to join, they would need to be based in that particular part of the country, somewhat far from here. What NAPAC always desperately needs is friends and supporters, and people who are willing to help raise money or to raise our profile, to drop a few leaflets into wherever, libraries, doctors' surgeries, places like that, wherever people can help spread the word, then we're always very, very happy to hear from them, and they can get in touch. You can get in touch with me at the office. I'm only based up in Borough, and I live in Bromley, so I'm a pretty local guy.
So victims, survivors and supporters, people that want to get involved in this area, can just contact the office or yourself if they wanted to get involved. And you're always looking for people. Yeah. Okay, so we've asked you a bit about your adversity as a child, Pete. Did you have any aspirations before the abuse happened to you? and how did that change, if it did change, after the abuse happened? So what was you like before and what was you like after? Was there a difference? Did anyone recognise the difference?
That's again a very good question, Chris.
I'm full of good questions, Pete.
Aren't you? You always have been. And it's also a difficult one to answer, and I'll tell you why. Because I was first abused when I was a very small child.
Mm-hmm.
I was abused to my memory at around 7 years of age. It could have been a little bit earlier, it could have been a little bit later, but I can certainly identify the time that it started when this particular person kind of came into my life. And of course I can identify the time when I was at my primary school. I can be quite precise about that. So in a sense, any aspirations or ambitions that I had or may have developed, I feel were probably completely sidelined, in fact swept away by the fact that my childhood was effectively stolen from me. So a lot of my childhood was concerned with, and again, I don't think many people outside of my little bubble would have recognised this, and probably most people inside my bubble didn't recognise it, was that it was a matter of survival for me. It was about coping with what was happening to me and trying to deal with the rest of the world through the eyes, and to use the title of your fantastic book, Chris, through the eyes of a child. I was just trying to cope with what was happening to me, and no child should have that burden. So I really didn't have aspirations. I had moments of thinking, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that, but I was also convinced, again, because of the words of the people who hurt me, the people who abused me, I was always convinced that I was never really destined to achieve very much. And in my very early life, that became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I left school with virtually no qualifications, feeling completely worthless, and I can put that firmly down to the fact that I had been abused. One thing that I can identify as a consequence of the abuse was 4 of those people that I've mentioned that abused me were all in the teaching profession, and from an early-ish age, I remember being told that I wasn't particularly bright, and that maybe I could aspire to become a shop assistant, something like that, something pretty important, but not something that you particularly needed great qualifications for. And so I aspired, if you like, when I became a teenager, to prove some of those people wrong by becoming a teacher. And with the support of some other people, I went back to college in my early 20s. I got the O-levels that I didn't get as a child. And then I went to university, I got a degree, I got a postgraduate teaching certificate, and then I taught in colleges and schools for the next 10 years. And I look back now with that amazing experience, because teaching is a real privilege, but the reason I went down that route was to kind of prove to myself that I wasn't stupid. And again, no child, no person should have to prove that to themselves, because we are who we are, and we all have talents and gifts. But one thing is for certain, is very often, not always, but very often, abuse suppresses and extinguishes those talents that we should be allowed to nurture, not to squash.
Thanks, Pete, for that. And again, I think it's really important for people to hear out there that if they didn't do well at school, because as you so eloquently put it, it is about just surviving, isn't it, once you've gone through abuse. And often we do leave school without doing very well at school. But it's also important that people hear, and that's the why we call it breaking the cycle, is because we can get to where we want to be. Just because our aspirations were killed off when we were children doesn't mean to say that we can't go after what we want in adulthood. It just might be difficult for some people, and they might need to have that specialist intervention to enable them to deal with the trauma, to deal with their low self-esteem issues if that's what they have, anything that's preventing them from going after what they wanted. So like you said, you become a teacher and you got all those qualifications, the degrees, etc., because you wanted to prove people wrong. I did exactly the same. I didn't get maths O level. I was told I was sick, I was stupid, and I would never amount to anything. And my 8 years of chasing the accountancy qualification was to prove other people wrong in the first instance. I failed at every level. I didn't pass it. I wasn't academic. I failed at every level, but something inside me was going, you are worth something. You are worth something. Just keep going. You will get this. There was many times that I wanted to just pack it all in, but there was just this inner fire that just kept saying to me, just keep putting the effort in and you will get there. And when I got that piece of paper, on one hand, I felt euphoric because I felt like I'd proven everybody wrong. But at the same time, I was like, wow, but now what? Now what? I've still got all of this stuff sitting here. I've been, for 8 years, my focus has been laser beamed and it's been get this, study, get this. And when I got it, it was like, well, now what? And I was 28 when I got that piece of paper. I was 28 when I got pregnant and had my son. 2 years later, I had a breakdown. Did anything like that happen to you?
I never suffered, thank goodness, I've never suffered a breakdown as such. I've had moments of kind of deep depression, but I do identify with the getting that piece of paper, achieving what you think is going to turn your life around, and then the reality hits that actually there's still issues to deal with. And even after nearly 10 years of teaching and being told I was a good teacher by all and sundry generally, and getting good results for my students, I still kind of didn't believe in myself. I still felt that worthless little boy inside, and something needed to give. And as I said earlier, it was the death of my dad and the realizing that I needed to do something, and then realizing that there are millions of others like me that changed my life completely. So like you, Chris, in a way, we will never know what our lives would have been had they not been blighted by abuse, but we make the best of it now and move forward the best we can, and help others to do the same.
Now, obviously, I know you and your family a little bit. I know that when you started NAPAC, you started it in your front room, isn't that correct?
Well, my bedroom, really.
Your bedroom. So tell everybody a little bit about those early years of setting up NAPAC and how challenging it was, and how on earth did you get the charity to where it is today by starting in your bedroom? What did you have to do right at the beginning to get it off the ground?
Again, a very good question, and the answer is relatively simple. One of my gifts, if you like, one of my talents, if I'd like to boast, is that I can write a good letter. I can communicate reasonably well most of the time. And during those early months, years indeed, of setting up NAPAC, I wrote to hundreds of people, pretty much demanding support for setting up a NAPAC. And I look back and, some people didn't reply, some people didn't have the courtesy to reply, but many did. Many did, and I still have most of those letters somewhere from all sorts of people, including politicians, including the head of big charities like involved with mental health. I've mentioned Childline already. Eventually the NSPCC came through and kind of supported what I was doing, but many others. And one of the early sources of inspiration was I got in touch with all most of the agony aunts, the people who write the agony aunt columns for newspapers, magazines. There are lots of them. They're mostly women, but there are a few men. It's a job I've always fancied, actually, as an agony uncle. I got a tremendous response from a lot of those people, including a woman called Saunders, who's the agony aunt for the Sun newspaper, and she still is. She's been there for about 30 odd years, bless her. She's been a great supporter, and she was one of the first people to write back to me to say, this idea is a great idea, Pete. Let's meet up and talk about it.
Wow.
And we did that, I'm guessing, back in the summer of about 1996. And ever since then, and she actually chaired the first big meeting of what was to become NAPAC, which we held at the NSPCC in the winter of 1997. She chaired that meeting brilliantly, and she's remained a friend and a supporter ever since. And as any of you who read The Sun will know, she regularly puts our contact details in her column, because many of the letters that she receives, and I remember her telling me this 20 years ago, many of the letters that she receives at her postbag at The Sun are from people who are not coping with memories of abuse.
Wow, 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 wow. But didn't your family get involved in the charity right in the early stages, and probably right up until recently?
Yeah, well, I've kind of got more than one family in a sense. Again, as is the case with many people who suffer abuse, when the revelations come out, when the truth comes out, it often rips families apart for all sorts of complex and, I have to say, understandable reasons sometimes. I mean, think about this: if somebody discloses abuse and said, "I was abused by another family member," and that family member is loved by other family members who were not abused, then they're going to struggle to come to terms with what they are being told that somebody did to somebody else. I understand that completely. When I disclosed the abuse, again, as I'm saying, going over 20 years ago, my kind of blood family really struggled to come to terms with it. And I think they struggled to come to terms with it for a number of reasons. One, perhaps, was the feeling that because I was the baby of the family, I was the youngest of our 5 siblings, perhaps there was tinges of, we didn't protect Pete. Not that they could have done. Maybe 1 or 2 of them may have known more about what was going on than they would ever let on. But nobody protected me. And so when you disclose these things, it often comes as a great shock. But also, I have to say, that there is a lot of shame and embarrassment around this subject of abuse. And I certainly remember, a brother of mine and a sister of mine sort of saying, well, why did you have to bring it up now? And my response was, well, I kept quiet about it for 38 years. When was I going to bring it up if it wasn't now, following the trauma of losing Dad? And I think they kind of understood that, but they still didn't really like it. And so I don't have an enormous amount of contact with that family now. I already had a small family in terms of my 2 children who are very young then. They've known from that day till now, sort of not the detail, but they know that Dad is a survivor of abuse. They've always been very supportive of me. And then in the very early days of setting up NAPAC, very early days, one of the committee members, one of the trustees of the charity, her and I eventually got together, and I won't mention her name because I think it's important that people keep their anonymity. But we kind of sort of fell in love and ended up getting married, and so I inherited another wonderful family who have been tremendously supportive, as Chris said, from that day right up till the present time.
And, NAPAC has gone from strength to strength. And as you said, you celebrated your 20th anniversary. How many years ago? Was it 2 years ago now?
Last year.
Oh, it was just last year. Oh, my God, Pete. Time doesn't fly sometimes. So 20th anniversary last year.
Yeah.
And obviously you're the founder of NAPAC, and you was the CEO of NAPAC until 2 years ago?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. See, I can't get my times right. You stepped aside to allow the charity to grow, but you are, in my opinion, still the face of NAPAC, because you go out and doing all the public speaking, you do all the raising awareness, and you do a lot of the fundraising, and people know you as NAPAC.
Yeah.
What is it that you want for NAPAC going forward, and where is NAPAC going in your view, in your trustees' view?
Sure. Well, I hope NAPAC is making progress. I mean, the reason I stood aside voluntarily stood aside as chief executive was because I recognised that I had strengths, but my strengths weren't necessarily around the day-to-day administration and running of an organisation. It's not something that I have ever particularly found attractive or wanted to do. What I've always wanted to do, and the ultimate answer to the question is I want NAPAC to be able to help as many people out there who need help. But I recognise my kind of shortcomings in terms of, you know, paperwork, doing the accounts, filling in home office funding applications and so on. I got those things off the ground, but I'm not somebody who particularly enjoys sitting behind a desk crunching the numbers, Chris, and so I prefer doing precisely what I'm doing now, which is talking about this issue rather than adding up a balance sheet.
Yeah, and again, I don't think people realise how much work and how many hats you have to wear when you're first starting off a charity. So you literally are the T-boy, T-girl, to the person that's applying for the funding, to the person that's being the spokesperson, to the person that's sorting out the accounts, doing the strategic planning, doing the budgeting, doing absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And it comes to a point where you just can't do that.
Yeah.
And as you said, you got to that point and you had to step aside and let other people that had that skill set step in and take the charity forward. And, you know, your charity is massive compared to mine. I know you're saying your charity's small, but I'm just me and 3 trustees.
Yeah.
And with a few supporters that have helped me, you know, maybe get a leaflet together, and it's just so hard. So when you're dealing with your own stuff, and I know I'm still dealing with my stuff, I know you're still dealing with your stuff, and you've got to then put this business head on, and you're trying to help victims and survivors move forward, but you've got to do that and that and that and that and that in order to get even off the ground and get going to help victim survivors. It can be so draining energy-wise, but also when you've got some people out there, some individuals out there that want to come along and attack everything that you're trying to do, that adds a different dimension and a different element. So for me, doing this radio show and working with people like yourself that really, really do want to push ahead and give victims and survivors exactly what they need, I think people really need to understand the struggles and the challenges in order to appreciate what we're trying to do rather than attack us for what we're trying to do. Have you got anything to say for that?
Well, you know, the idea of people attacking, one of the many consequences of abuse is it leaves a lot of people understandably very angry.
Yeah.
And anger is a big issue. Anger is normal. It's not unhealthy if directed in the right way. Yeah. It's understandable and needs to be worked with. You know, when we suffer as we suffered, we've every right to be angry about that.
Yeah.
And sadly, I have to say that, you know, some of us as survivors, victim survivors, carry that anger into our adult life, and sometimes that anger can be misdirected. And you and I know that sometimes we can be the subject of that anger because we have, in a sense, dared to raise our heads above the parapet. And I think there are sometimes elements of, I'm not judging anybody, but I sometimes think there are elements of anger, there's elements of jealousy. And sometimes I think there's probably elements of what the victim survivors themselves just can't pinpoint and can't name themselves. There's just something, you know, you and I know people out there who attack, who are in the cyber world, who seriously, obviously have issues that they need dealing with. And for us, it's a matter of trying not to, it's easier said than done, but it's a matter of trying not to take it personally, because these people really are angry, I suspect, more with themselves than with anybody else.
What I wanted to get across, Pete, is that people like you and I, we, as I said, we don't sit in places of judgment. What we're trying to do is help as many people as possible. And I urge the fractions out there, because there's more than one, there's lots of fractions within social media about this subject because of what you've just said. And I just urge everybody to go, you know what, if we are really going to tackle how we see and deal with childhood abuse on the big scale that it is, that we do need to come to an understanding, a level of understanding where we all do work together and move forwards. That's what I'm trying to verbalise and get out there.
Sure.
And I'm more than willing to have conversations with anybody, past, present and future, to make this happen.
Yeah.
Because individually, you, your organisation, me, my organisation, and all the other organisations out there, and all the other victim survivors out there, if we are in our own silos, we are not going to be able to deal with this massive epidemic that we know exists within our communities. So it's about actually, you know what, we've got a very good friend, Daniel Wollstonecraft, who is part of many groups out there that is doing an event called The Uprising on the 29th of July at Speaker's Corner. And what it's doing, the event, is getting many victim survivors, supporters and groups together as possible to actually say, look, there's an army of us out there now, not to create trouble, but just to say, look, this thing called abuse has impacted so many of us, and all we want to do is be heard. We want to be heard. We want the impact of childhood abuse, mental, physical and sexual, to be known and to be recognised, and for the government to actually do something about it. Now, there are lots of things going on. There's lots of inquiries going on, as we know. There's lots of funding being applied, but we don't see it being directed in the right way. So for me, I stand up and say specialist support services are really needed. They're needed at early intervention for children, adolescents and adults. And for those of us who've already gone through it, and we've got children of our own, and we're still being impacted. So it's really, really needed. Can you tell everybody what NAPAC actually does, what services it provides for victim and survivors?
Okay, the services that NAPAC provides are simple, straightforward, but in our experience, very, very effective. We don't put out a hand and heal people. We're not a saviour in that sense. Healing is a word, but it's a complex issue, and we don't use it lightly. But what we provide is a free phone helpline, support line. It doesn't show up on anybody's phone bill, whether it be their mobile phone or their landline, and they can ring us during those working hours. They'll be given a half an hour of time. We try to limit the time to make it effective and helpful, and to help as many people as possible. And many, I have to say, many of the people who call us just want to talk to somebody who understands the issues for a while. They don't necessarily want to be put in touch with a local support group, which is fortunate because there aren't that many around, but they want to talk to somebody who understands, who's somebody who doesn't say, well, it happened a long time ago, get over it, or doesn't belittle them in some other way. And that certainly is something that would never happen with NAPAC, because we understand, to use that expression, we get it. So that's a service that we run pretty much sort of most of the year round. We also, when we have funding, and we've just had some more funding recently for this, which is good news, we run support groups for survivors. These are, again, facilitated, confidential and safe spaces where there is a programme of work that lasts 12 weeks. It's 12 sessions over roughly over 13 weeks. They tend to have a break in the middle. They take place in the evening, enabling people who work to join. It isn't just a sort of walk in and join. People have to apply and come forward and talk to us. And if appropriate, we will welcome them into a support group. And the support group works through various issues that confront survivors on a daily basis. We've already mentioned anger. Anger is one such issue that is dealt with, because it's something that affects many of us as survivors. But there's many other things as well, and they are facilitated. These groups are facilitated by very experienced counsellors and or people who understand these issues intimately. So they are very safe and effective groups. And the reason I know that is because, even though I'm not chief executive anymore, I still see the feedback that comes from people who have attended these groups, and comments like, it changed my life, it turned my life around, it saved my life, are not at all uncommon. So we know that this is something that works, and we've been doing it for many, many years. And I am delighted that we've recently had some funding from a trust fund and some more money from the Home Office to run some support groups for survivors. Not enough, as I say, there's never going to be enough service out there, but those are the things we do that primarily affect survivors directly. Then, of course, we do things like what I'm doing right at this moment, which is talking on the radio, or we do TV. I personally speak at lots of conferences and am involved with other initiatives, both national and international, to raise the profile of survivors. And ultimately, and I think the thing that we're all ultimately interested in here, is making sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to kids in the future.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, on Facebook Live, I'm just going to give Pete a bit of a breather before we settle in for the second half of his interview. So I'm just going to play some songs, so you won't hear them on Facebook Live, but you will hear them on the radio if you've tuned into www.powerextraradio.co.uk. So here's the tune. Hopefully, if you're listening into the radio, you will hear it. And I'm just going to give Pete a breather whilst the tune plays. So I'm actually playing at the moment Crockett's theme, which is quite a calming theme that I play in my Pilates class to chill everybody out. Okay, so enjoy if you are on the radio show, but if you're watching on Facebook Live, please go and get a cup of tea and join us in a few minutes.
Got a mug or anything for this? Sure, okay.
Lovely. We're just going to play We're just going to play one more tune. This one's a bit more upbeat. It's Don't Miss the Party Line. So a bit more upbeat, but it's literally a minute. So join us in a minute. Lovely. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So that was the music. It was Crockett's theme and Party Line. So now we are going back to Pete, and I want to ask you, Pete, what is a day in the life or a week in the life of Pete Saunders as a founder of NAPAC? What would an average week look like? Because I can only imagine it's all over the place and you're doing lots of interesting things. So just describe what a day or a week in the life of Pete Saunders look like.
Wow. Again, good question. I mean, I'm somebody who, I have to say, I'm very fortunate to be able to say, A, I love my work, and B, no 2 days are ever really the same, and no 2 weeks are ever the same. There are weeks when I don't seem to go anywhere other than the office, so I'm dealing with emails and phone calls and things like that, letters. But there are other weeks when things get really quite exciting, and I find myself traveling the world. I'm involved with a number of initiatives at the moment that involve quite a bit of overseas travel, funded by others, I have to stress, not funded by NAPAC, so funded by very kind, supportive benefactors. But I was in South America back in January. I was in Belgium a couple of weeks ago. I'm going off to Dublin in August when the Pope visits the Irish Republic to meet with survivors in Ireland. And there was even talk of me going over to Jamaica later in the year to meet with survivors on that particular island where there have been lots of issues. So those things don't happen every day.
No.
And it sounds far more glamorous than it is. And you know, I travel economy class. I'm not sitting in the front of the plane or anything, so it's never particularly comfortable or uplifting, but it's important work. There are weeks when I'm doing a lot of media stuff. There are weeks when there is no media interest. You know, we've got Brexit, we've got Trump, we've got the disaster at Grenfell, we've got also the World Cup at the moment. All these things are taking up, you know, time and attention, and away from this issue. Sometimes I'm speaking at conferences. Tomorrow is an example. Tomorrow, I think is Wednesday, I'm on a senior management group for a police investigation, a very large police investigation into abuse in a boys' home down in Surrey. So I will be down at Surrey Police Headquarters tomorrow, meeting with the senior officer and others who are dealing with this ongoing case. And it's really good that they invited a survivor or NAPAC to be part of that group, to, if you like, to give them the inside track on actually what being a survivor is all about, and just tips on how they deal with the various or the many victim survivors that have come forward, and they find it, and they've often said they find it very, very valuable talking to survivors and getting that kind of inside feel for how to deal with these very, you know, sensitive and tricky issues. So that's tomorrow. Thursday, I have my supervision or therapy, because again, as Chris has alluded to, this isn't something that just goes away. We probably have to deal with these issues for the rest of our lives. So Thursday morning, I have a session with a psychotherapist, which is incredibly helpful to me. And then Thursday afternoon, I've got a slightly nicer thing to do. I'm driving off to a hotel up in the Cotswolds area, and on Friday I'm taking part in a cycle event with a very large solicitors partnership who have invited me along as a guest. It's very much a public relations exercise on their part, but they've been very helpful to the charity over the years. They represent a lot of victim survivors in their work, and they, being aware of me, they and knowing that I am a cyclist, they invited me up. So on Friday, instead of working, I'll be slogging 80 miles on my push bike, but proudly wearing my NAPAC racing jersey as I do so, and doubtless throughout the day talking about the work that we do and how important it is that we get more support. So it's a bit of glamour, it's a bit of hard work, but NAPAC is always on the agenda, and that kind of never really goes away.
So really, your role for NAPAC is 24/7. We never sort of like get off the roundabout, so to speak, do we?
No.
I was really gonna, you picked in it a little bit. I was gonna ask you how this has impacted your health and wellness, and again, you can go into as much detail as you want or not. It's your choice because it's you. How has the trauma that you've endured as a child impacted your health and wellness, and how have you dealt with that? So you've alluded to cycling, which I know you're really keen on now, but just share what you want or not, and then I'll pitch in with how it's affected me and how we know it's affected lots of victims and survivors out there.
Yeah, well, you know, health wellness, physical wellness, mental health wellness, and I think they are, and you know this better than I, they are closely linked. I'm fortunate in one sense that I've from being a schoolboy, I was always interested in sport and I was always interested in cycling. So I've always kept myself physically quite fit, and I now appreciate how important that is in terms of dealing with other issues in your life. Because if you are fit, then there's something about your mental health that kind of is more likely to keep you on the straight and narrow than if you just decide to blob and end up sitting in a pub drinking 12 pints of beer, which I'm not saying I haven't done that in the past. It's afflicted many survivors. But if it comes to a toss-up, I would rather go out and do 40 or 50 miles on the bike than go and wreck my body with alcohol. But I totally understand people who don't, in a sense, feel that they have that choice. My mental health has always suffered because of what happened to me, and I recently had reason to obtain my medical records, funnily enough, and which was quite an emotional experience in some ways, to look at my medical records going back to my childhood. And there is certainly a pattern of mental health issues in terms of anxiety and not feeling good about myself, and that goes back many years in my medical records. It, again, fortunately hasn't caused me to turn to medication. It hasn't caused me to be out of work or to not be able to work, etc. I'm fortunate that I've always been able to keep going, but obviously over the last sort of 40-50 years there's been times when I have struggled and I've found myself going to the doctor to tell them that. And what I have to say, and I think it is really important, was some years ago, quite a few years ago, I did kind of hit the jackpot when I disclosed to my current, or then she's retired now, but my current then GP, that I wasn't feeling great, and she actually had the courage to ask me whether it was something to do with my childhood. Now, where that came from, I don't know, other than maybe she had a skip through my medical notes, which would have been very enlightening and encouraging. And I told her that I'd suffered abuse in childhood, and she said she wondered. She then said that it was something that she knew something about. Not saying that it was a disclosure, but she indicated that it was something that was close to her life, and she directed me to some therapy, which became kind of life changing in a way. and it's therapy that I'm still fortunate enough to receive to the present day. And you know, I used to think people who were in therapy for years were kind of saddos. I now realise that actually a lot of us will need a lot of help for a long time to come, and there's nothing vaguely weak about that. If anything, I think it's a strength to say, yeah, I benefit from help, and I'm a better person for getting that help, and rather than just the kind of macho blustering through thinking I'm okay now. Well, most of the time I am okay, but some of the time I'm not, and that's when I know I need help.
That's really interesting for you to say that, because I was going to actually ask you, do you think being a male, it's harder to speak out as a man and get or ask for the help that you need? Do you think that is right, or what are your views on that?
Well, like you, Chris, I would never ever purport to speak on behalf of others, but I think I think what you're hinting at generally, I think, is probably correct. I think, and again, based on my experience, not just based on me, but based on my experience, I do think that men find it more difficult to speak of these things because we are brought up to be strong. We are brought up. I can remember my dad before he was digging a thorn out of my finger with a needle and some iodine. I remember him saying to me, "Be a big boy, don't cry."
Yeah.
Well, it killed me, and I screamed.
Sorry, Peter, didn't mean to laugh.
No, but looking back, of course, it is funny.
Yeah.
But you know, and you know, I screamed, but then I felt guilty about, you know, I was not doing as I was told.
But that's a typical comment, isn't it, to a boy?
It is.
Yeah.
It is, and I hope that has changed over the years.
Yeah.
You know, I think now we've got more enlightened parents, hopefully, who don't put that pressure on their children because they're a boy or a girl or whatever. But yes, in my experience at NAPAC, possibly demonstrated by the sheer numbers who come forward, the majority tend to be female. But when a male puts their head above the parapet, for example, when I do media, there is always then a spike in calls from men.
Yeah.
So obviously men hearing other men,
yeah,
it kind of gives the men permission to feel that they can speak out. I used to speak to a lot of survivors and male survivors. I don't speak to as many now, but I still speak to some, and I know that they really, really struggle and find it difficult to trust and find it difficult to know who they can really talk to, who gets it.
Yeah.
And you know, I kind of get it.
And that's one of the reasons why you set up NAPAC in the first place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Now we have a few questions, and I don't know if you can answer them straight away. But one of them is, abuse as a child can affect future relationships too. What are your views on that?
Oh, well, again, complex question, but very, very appropriate, because one thing that we know, and I say from my 20 plus years experience at NAPAC, is that abuse and its consequences is like a sledgehammer through trust. And trust is at the heart of effective and certainly loving relationships. So when as a child you have been betrayed, when that trust has been shattered, it then becomes very, very difficult for many people to trust. And I know, you know, from childhood to this very day, it's still an issue that I grapple with a lot, is trusting people. And sometimes even trusting myself, you know, trusting myself not to go off and to abuse my body, to go off and get drunk or something, which I've done too many times in the past, which only really hurts me, but I accept that it actually hurts others around me as well. There's always other casualties. It's not just yourself when you're self-harming in a way. But relationships are something that most definitely suffer as a result of abuse. And I've spoken to literally thousands of survivors over the years, some of whom women have told me, again, without going into detail, that they find intimacy almost impossible.
Yeah.
They've got married, they've had children, but they cannot let themselves physically be intimate in the way that they should be able to, because they've had their frame of reference around a trust in another individual shattered by abuse, and it's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy.
Another comment here, it says it's not just the trust, but also going on to be abused in relationships. So it's almost like you go on to be abused in different relationships, because I don't understand the reasons why, but a lot of people do end up in abusive relationships, or they end up being abusive in the relationship because they don't want to get hurt.
Yes.
I was told by my psychiatrist, whatever you want to call her, that I was lucky because I'd met my husband when I was 15 and I'm still with him. Yeah, we have our issues like everybody in their relationships, but I had stability. So I was told I was lucky because I built that trust with somebody at a young age, which was my boyfriend and then my husband. And then we've grown together and we've shared what's gone on for me. Yeah. So I've been lucky. Yes. And I'm also going to own up here to what you were saying, that intimacy in a relationship, it has been difficult. Yes, I've had children, but I've not been able to be intimate and enjoy it as a normal person because of issues that I have all around that. And, you know, the abuse that I suffered, the issues around the type of abuse that I suffered has also caused me not to be able to enjoy an intimate relationship. Yeah. And of course that impacts me, impacts my husband. And there's going to be lots of people out there that are in the same boat. So it is good for us that we are actually touching on that and acknowledging that, because, you know, love at the end of the day should be free and easy. Not easy as in you give it away, but there should be no ties and no challenges around it. It should just be normal, whatever normal is. So someone else has asked, now this is Michelle. Now Michelle suffers from DID and complex PTSD, and she is a survivor of ritual abuse. So she's put all of this down herself, and she says, does NAPAC support survivors of ritual abuse who have DID? And my feeling for that is that is so specialised that maybe you don't, or am I wrong?
No, is it Michelle?
Yeah.
Michelle, that is an incredibly appropriate question to ask. And, you know, there is a great deal of denial out there about abuse, but certainly around issues of ritual and organised abuse. Not a bit of it at NAPAC. We know 100% that these kind of vile crimes in these kind of situations go on, have gone on, and are still going on, and we do our very best to support. But Chris is right. It does take specialist support to help somebody effectively with DID, with complex PTSD. And many of the people who call us have those issues. And many of those people are helped simply by talking to somebody who, as I said earlier, understands. But we will always, if we are able, refer them on to somewhere else where there is a little bit more specialist help for that particular issue. I mean, I would mention, you may be familiar with it, you may not, I would mention, though, the Clinic for Dissociative Studies, which has done a lot of work with survivors of ritualistic, organised abuse. And do fantastic work. Again, it's a small organisation, and people can self-refer if they know about it. But it's you know, not everybody knows about that. But you kind of know about it now if you didn't before, and we would certainly, hopefully, tell you about it if you were to ring our support line. But yeah, we do get that we are not, you know, we're not medics. We're mostly survivors. We're mostly people who care deeply about what's happened to you and want to help you to move on in whatever way. And we have a set of booklets that I'll talk about in a while, that most people, in fact everybody I've ever known, have found them to be incredibly helpful. And they're written by survivors. They're not written by academics or therapists of any kind. They're written by people like Chris, myself and others who've been there, sadly, and kind of understand the issues and share their concerns and tips about how to move on.
And again, I know Michelle's case, so to speak, Pete, but that was a question that she specifically put towards NAPAC. So I think she's got an answer to her question now, but I know Michelle is fighting for her own needs
Yeah.
with her own local authority
Yeah.
at the moment, and they're not being very helpful. So I don't think she is going to be surprised by what you've said. But we can only do what we can do at the end of the day, you know.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
get lots of people coming to me and asking me if I can offer counselling, if I can help support out their sort out their housing, if I can sort out whatever it is. And the answer is no, I can't, because my charity is set up specifically for health and wellness and running workshops for one-to-one and groups for health and wellness. So even though I'm here raising awareness of child abuse in all its forms, the impact of it all in all its forms, and I'm here to try and help change by using my own lived experiences, change legislation or change processes, change procedures. I can't expand my remit to fit everybody's requirements. And unfortunately, that is the landscape today. Our charities have their own remit, and we can only offer what we can within that remit. Even if we want to step outside of that and be able to go, you know what, a survivor, come to me, show me what is your problem, your challenges, and let me sort the whole thing out. That would be absolutely 100% bloody fantastic if we were able to do that for survivors and sort out all of their needs, whatever that looked like. That would be the ultimate goal. But that's never going to happen, not in a million years. So we've got to try and do the best that we can. So if there are more specialist organisations out there dealing with what they're dealing with, we need to, I think, go, you know what, there's all of these organisations out there. This is what this organisation does. This is what this organisation does. And just try and pass people on to the organisation that is the best fit for them. I think that's all we can do. It's not enough, but it's all that we can do at the moment. So I just want to go back a minute, Pete, and ask you about your time as a teacher. Now, you were saying that you was a teacher for 10 years. Did you ever spot children that had gone through abuse?
Again, a good question.
How easy is it to spot the signs of children that may be going through abuse, or isn't it? Because I give, people out there give teachers a hard time and say, you know, when I was a child and I was going through the abuse, I went into school and I told my teacher what was happening to me. But that particular teacher chose not to back me up in what I was saying. They actually shut me down. So have I got unrealistic expectations that a teacher should spot the signs and deal with what I was going through, for example? Are my expectations unrealistic? What is it like being in a teacher's shoes?
Okay. Well, I was teaching older kids. I wasn't teaching little ones. But what you've said reminded me of one or two things to mention. A former colleague of mine, at 5 or 6 years of age at school, she was being abused. When she was drawing pictures, she drew pictures that drew her the attention of her teacher, because they were pictures, again, I won't be graphic, but let's just say they were pictures that a child shouldn't really knowing about. And the teacher asked this little girl what she was drawing, and she told the teacher what she was drawing. The response from the teacher was, "You filthy little liar."
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, that young woman never then spoke for more than 10 years about what happened to her. She did have the courage to speak and the strength to speak. And her father, in fact it was, subsequently was sent to prison for abusing her. So that has a kind of conclusion.
Yeah.
But that attitude of "you filthy little liar" is something that I hope it's history now.
Yeah.
And I hope that teachers are trained to spot the signs and symptoms more. I mean, nobody can ever be definite about, you know, a child could come to school looking miserable because they haven't got the toy for their birthday present that they hoped for. Doesn't mean they're being abused.
No.
But there are definitely signs and symptoms that teachers, you know, I mean, sustained depression, sustained being down, sustained wetting themselves, or sustained attention seeking. All these kinds of things are things that we all know about, and can be taught, if you like, and to teachers. And most teachers, thank goodness, are very open to wanting to know about this, because if they haven't been abused themselves, fortunately for them, then they want to be educated because they want to be able to help. And that is my experience. I work with a lot of young people, and I look back now, and there were certainly some young people, teenagers, in my various groups that I used to teach over many years, who I would probably put money on were having a hard time at home.
Yeah.
But at the time I didn't join the dots.
Yeah.
But when I look back now and I think of X, Y, and Z, I think, oh my God, were they really having a bad time? And specifically, I do remember one particular young woman. She was a child. I mean, she was 16. She came in, and I remember her coming into the staff room one day and showing burn marks on her arms where her father had put an iron onto her skin. Because she wasn't the favoured child, and she wanted more from life than was currently on offer, and she was very severely physically hurt by that parent. So I look back and think, it's something that touched me during my career, my career as well. The other thing, when you were just saying earlier about getting support and so on, just a couple of things to mention in terms of excuse me, got a bit of a thing in my throat. In terms of support in Bromley specifically, there are two services that spring to mind that I think are worth a mention and are worth any listeners making note of, because they could be helpful. One is the Bromley Y, which is a counselling service for young people. It's in the book. It's on the internet. Bromley Y. It's just in the town centre. And that's a fantastic service for young people who want to talk about any issues. And I think the age range is something like 13 to 23. It certainly used to be when I was in touch with them. And then also, what many people in Bromley are not aware of is that there is a women's therapy service, which you need to access through your GP. But if you don't know about it, and maybe if your GP doesn't know about it, then you can't get referred. But again, it offers a fantastic service that if people are looking for some immediate potential support, or at least to get onto a waiting list, ask about the women's therapy service at Stepping Stones on, I think it's Mason's Hill.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I just want to go back on the teacher thing, because obviously when I was a child and I was silenced, I grew up with probably a chip on my shoulder about teachers. However, I know lots of teachers that are my friends, and they do their utmost to try and help the children that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And also, I read out last week on the show, there was a newspaper article where it said that over a quarter of teachers are actually responsible for helping poor children, that when they come in, they're washing their clothes, they're feeding the children. So there are so many caring teachers out there that are doing so much good. So I just want to balance out my own lived experience of having a negative experience with a teacher, because I do know fantastic teachers. But to balance that out again, I also do want to say that there are, that come to my attention in the last week, month, 6 months, cases locally that have the teachers or the people that are working with children have known about child abuse that's been going on. They've escalated it up to their managers. The managers don't want it going anywhere. The head of the institution, the organisation, doesn't want it going anywhere, and it's been sat on. And this is what we need to change. This definitely needs to change, because at the end of the day, the institution is responsible for the safety of the child. And if the child is coming to a teacher, for example, and saying this is what's happening, and that teacher is then escalating it up and they're not getting anywhere with it, where does this teacher go? And I've put out there so many times for a teacher to get in touch with me anonymously to tell me their experience of they've escalated it, but it's not gone anywhere. How does that make them feel, and where do they go with it? Do you have any answers, Pete? Do you know any of those answers? If you don't, it's fine. But as a teacher, what was the safeguarding policy when you was a teacher?
Well, again, I worked in sixth form and further and higher ed, so it wasn't such a big issue. And I have to say, both going back to my teacher training days, I did a PGCE 30 years ago. I don't ever remember any kind of input around safeguarding issues, which of course there should be, because teenagers are just still vulnerable children, as are our younger ones. And you're right, the vast majority of people who become teachers do so for the very best of reasons, and would always do their best for their students. That's why they go into that profession. There is always the rotten apple, we know that. But there is a lot more support that needs doing, and I think you're kind of almost hinting at mandatory reporting for abuse in institutions where others are looking after our children. And really, again, going back to my own personal circumstances, I was told on a number of occasions in recent years that the a particular priest who abused me at my secondary school, in the words of an adult recently, a couple of years ago, said everybody knew he was an abuser. Well, my question is, if everybody knew he was an abuser, why didn't somebody report it? And why didn't they? Perhaps they didn't know where to report it, because you're right. Often these institutions are more interested in protecting their reputation than they are in protecting the children in their care. And so there has to be, if you like, a kind of external place. And we have LADOs, we have the local authority designated officers that should be out there and should be well trained and should be responsive to any reports of abuse. There is far too much hesitation to report a potential crime of this nature, and in fact it's better to report it and get it wrong than to leave the child at the mercy of a potential perpetrator. Absolutely, I agree with that. But I would love to know your views out there, guys, if you agree with what we're saying, because it's always good to have, two sides of the conversation. Now, Pete's got 7 minutes before he's got to go back to work, so I want to ask Pete This is work, Chris. This is work.
This is work. I want to ask Pete about the End Clergy Abuse ECA that he's just got involved with, and I also want him to quickly show you his booklets that he's got. So, Pete, End Clergy Abuse, off you go.
Okay, End Clergy Abuse is an initiative. 20 odd years ago, I founded NAPAC. I set NAPAC up. What I've always been conscious of is that there isn't an international organisation to challenge abuse perpetrated by what, sadly, and I speak as a Catholic myself, perpetrated by probably the biggest employer of paedophiles and perverts on the planet, and that is the church. And that has to be tackled. And so a group of us from around the world, not just Europe, not just North America, but around the world, have come together to form this organisation called ECA, Ending Clergy Abuse. The website, as I say, have a quick look. It's a good website. It's ecaglobal.org. That's ECAGLOBAL, ecaglobal.org, and it tells you all about it. And it's an exciting development that is already making waves and is certainly starting to shake the Vatican, which some of you will understand that needs to happen. The booklets that I've brought in are booklets that are featured on our website, so they are downloadable, and if anybody would like hard copies, then get in touch with the NAPAC office and we will certainly be happy to send you copies. It costs us money to do that, so we'd always prefer it that you downloaded them from the website. It doesn't cost anything, or if you can read them from the website, then we're not ripping up the planet with trees and so on. There's six. They're simple. I don't know if they're in focus there.
Yep, they are, absolutely.
So, number one is about survivors, what it means to be a survivor. When I was told I was a survivor 23 years ago, I didn't understand what people were saying, because I thought survivors were people that had survived the Holocaust or got off a burning ship or something.
Yeah, true.
Which is another apt description. But we are all survivors. We've survived something dreadful and we've come through it. we, we thought we'd be clever and put a youngster on the front, which is when abuse tends to occur, although not exclusively, and then maybe the adult that they hopefully become later in life. We think it's very important that people are told every day. We tell people, and I know Chris tells people, that it wasn't your fault, because many survivors, many children and the adults that they become grow up thinking that somehow they contributed to the abuse because they didn't stop it, or they went back to the person that was abusing them. It's all about a power dynamic that children don't understand, but as an adult we can understand it. And as I say, as a child, in fact, a therapist, a so-called therapist, and I said so-called therapist many years ago with me, said, I don't understand why you didn't stop the abuse. Well, I was 7 years old when it started.
How damaging is that, Pete?
Phenomenally damaging, phenomenally damaging. You know, we've got some so-called professionals out there who can do a lot of
damage,
harm, Chris, as you know. You're not alone. I think that's another important message that people need to hear, and very often want to hear, to know that they're not the only ones that are going through this. It's not to minimise it. It's not to say it's going to make you feel better knowing that you're not alone. We don't want this to happen to anybody, but we are part of a very, very huge community. Again, as Chris said earlier, not just in this country, but around the world. And of course, indeed, here in Bromley, there will be thousands of people who suffered as Chris and I did as children. So you're not alone. Was it really abuse? Is a question that we get on the helpline sometimes, because people are confused. Abuse is very confusing for the child, and it still is very confusing for us as adults. I will be confused till the day I die as to why people do these dreadful things to children. It's beyond my comprehension. But sometimes people say, well, he or she only did this to me or only did that to me. Is it abuse? Well, only you can answer that question. People will know whether they've been abused or not, because if it's still affecting them many years, decades later, then it probably was abuse of one kind or another, but that's for the person to decide. A lot of abuse, as some of you will sadly know, is perpetrated by people who should be nurturing, caring for, protecting that child, and some abuse doesn't appear to involve much in the way of, should we say, hurting the child or being violent in the sense of how we understand violence. A lot of abuse is perpetrated with a smile and a stroke and loving words, but it's still abuse, and if it's abuse, it has a lifetime devastating effect. And it leaves us very confused. And what we try to do at NAPAC is we try to help anybody to kind of untangle that web. And I think this is the thickest of our booklets, is trying to help people to come to terms with those very, very complex and often very contradictory feelings that they have about what happened. As an example, you know, I hated what my dad did to me, but I loved my dad. That's a very, very confusing issue, for certainly for a child, but even for the adult that they become. And as we know, sadly, most child abuse is perpetrated by somebody who should actually be loving and caring for that child. And so nothing is going to leave a child and the adult, they become more confused than I remember one young woman describing, you know, good daddy and bad daddy.
Right.
She just wanted the good daddy. She didn't want the bad daddy, but she wanted the good daddy.
Yeah, breaks your heart, doesn't it?
It is heartbreaking, and it's, again, the ultimate betrayal.
Yeah.
And then the final little booklet, which is not quite so thick, which we call Healing at Your Own Pace. As I say, healing, I think, is a tough one, and we don't say, you know, read this book and you will be healed. Visit the NAPAC website and you will be healed. Or have therapy for 20 years and you will be healed. We can't say that. What we can say is that we're all on a journey, and we're all on different parts of that journey, and we're all going to do our best to support each other on that journey in whatever way we can, whatever seems appropriate, and whatever is within our gift. I mean, I know I'm not a therapist or a counsellor. Chris isn't a therapist or a counsellor, but what we do does have a value, and it helps people to move on. And I'm sadly going to have to move on quite soon, so I've got to get back to Memphis for some more work. But it's been fantastic to be here with you. Chris, and with anybody that I've been privileged to be talking to this afternoon.
So just give everybody the contact details that you want to give out, Pete, and then I'll say goodbye to you, and then I'll just carry on for a little while.
Okay. Well, I think probably most people who are listening in or watching in are familiar with Google and the internet. I'm not. I'm rubbish with
IT.
with technology and IT. I'm utterly hopeless. I have to ask the granddaughter or my children or something. But we have a free phone helpline. The free phone helpline is 0808 801 0331. So that's 80808 801 0331. That's a free phone. 10 in the morning till 9 at night, Monday to Thursday. Finishes at 6 on a Friday. But just as critically, because you won't necessarily get through easily because our lines are very, very busy, go on to napac.org.uk for some very helpful information and other ways of getting in touch, because you can email us and we will always send a reply.
And again, I have had a few comments where people have said that they've phoned the NAPAC helpline and they haven't got through. Yeah. So we know that. We know that. Just tell everybody just quickly, Pete, how many calls you've actually had and how many you can actually answer.
Well, when I'm asked a question like that, the temptation is to say, should we just pack up and go home? Last year, NAPAC received close to 100,000 calls to our support line. 100,000 people immense. Attempted to call. We spoke with about 6,500 people.
So that's not even 10%.
That's less than 10%.
Yeah.
We are working hard to increase the service provision.
Yeah.
Because we know that we need to reach
the
out
needs
to more people.
There.
But without the support, without the funding, without the volunteers, the space, that, it simply can't happen.
It can't happen.
But that was 6,500 people who were given support.
Yeah.
And many others who rang who didn't get through would have gone onto the website, would have downloaded the booklets, etc., or sent an email. And we get about 100 emails each week at the moment, all of which get an answer.
And again, as you said, the need out there, it outstrips supply. So at the end of the day, you try and help as many people as you possibly can, but you can't always help everybody. And that does leave a lot of victims and survivors out there very frustrated.
Indeed.
But we can only do what we can do. So please just keep trying. As someone has said, they kept trying, and eventually they got through. But that has left them feeling frustrated.
Sure.
And unfortunately, there are people that try and get through to me as well. There's only one of me. I do have to have my downtime, and I can't always be there for someone when they are in need. It's just physically impossible because I've got my own needs, I've got my own family needs. So we just do our best, and that's all we can do. So guys, I'm just going to play you a tune while Pete departs, and then I will be back to round up what we've spoken about today and to answer any of your questions. So please stay tuned. Please feel free to share this Facebook Live, and I will be back in a moment. Okay, I'm playing Killer. Enjoy.
Keep in touch.
Come on, please. Lovely. So that was Killer. Just my choice of music, guys. If you've got any tunes you want me to play you in future episodes, just let me know. So first and foremost, I just want to thank Pete Saunders from NAPAC for just spending some time with us today, just explaining, you know, about his adversity that he'd gone through, his aspirations, and actually his achievements that he has managed in his life. And I would say that one of his major achievements was setting up NAPAC, National Association for People Abused in Childhood, and helping as many victims and survivors that he could help. And again, I know he's really sorry to those people that have contacted his charity over the years and have not been able to get the help that they needed. But as he explained, yeah, over 100,000 contacts via the helpline, but only being able to physically pick up 6,500 calls throughout the year because of resources, lack of them, lack of people, lack of space, and lack of money. So there is a huge need out there for victims and survivors that have or want to contact national helplines like NAPAC, like TST, like Rape Crisis, and all the you know, the male specific helplines out there, Survivors UK, Mankind, Survivors Manchester. So there are many helplines out there that we as victims and survivors can access, but we need to be able to get through when we need the help. And unfortunately, that's not always possible for every victim and survivor who comes forwards. What else did I want to say? So again, I just wanted to remind you that you can download any of those help books from the NAPAC website. And again, if you go on to any of the charities that I've mentioned, and there's many out there that I've not mentioned, just have a Google, have a look, do your own research, find out what resources there are on all of these different websites and see what works for you. And please share anything with me that you feel will help victims and survivors on their journey of healing, of, you know, coming to terms with what they've gone through, understanding the impact on themselves and their families, and how they've healed. You know, as I said so many times before, the impact, the damage that this trauma has caused on our mental and our physical health, back then, now, and future. We have to try and come to terms with it. We have to try and deal with it. We have to try and untangle it. And we can only do that ourselves, and we're all on a different journey. And we all find different things that are impactful for us, that are, you know, that help us. So by sharing that with people, they may find that something that you say or you share resonates with them and helps them with their journey going forward. So please always tag me in stuff that other people may find beneficial, because I can only share my journey and what I've tried, what's worked for me, what hasn't worked for me. But just because it's worked for me, it might not work for someone else. And just because it hasn't worked for me doesn't mean that it may work for someone else. So please just keep sharing your resources, and let's, you know, as I said before, collaborate, move forwards together, because when we're working in silos, when we are in our own space, we are not able to really move on as quickly or as efficiently as if we talk, come together, speak as one voice, come together, work as a collective group, to make the change that is needed on a strategic and grand scale to start really putting a dent in this epidemic that is child abuse within England and Wales, Scotland, and the rest of the world. So just, you know, social media is a good thing, and it's also a curse, because just because, you know, a child abuser, for example, a sexual offender, might live in the UK, often it is easier for them to perpetrate their crimes abroad, and they can do that via social media, via the internet. And so we are not talking about childhood abuse just within our local community or our town or our city or nationwide. We're talking about global childhood abuse, whether it be mental, physical, emotional or sexual. We're talking about this stuff that happens all around the world, and it can be perpetrated by the person that lives next door to us. So we do need to start taking our heads out of the sand, and we do need to start actually going, you know what, this elephant in the room that is childhood abuse can happen within our own homes, in the next door neighbour's house, to the person living down the street, to the person that is in the community, could be the perpetrator or the victim. Yeah, nationwide, worldwide. It's really important that people get this thing called childhood abuse is an epidemic, and it is endemic within our society, and we need to be able to talk about it, raise awareness, come up with the challenges, but also then start coming up with the solutions, because we need action. We need the right solutions in place to help stop child abuse in the current day, to help put solutions in place for victims and survivors that have endured childhood abuse 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, yesterday, as well as safeguard children today, tomorrow, and in the future. So, as I've said, there are many organisations out there, many victims and survivors, many supporters out there that need to come together and collaborate to move this whole thing forwards. So I'm often quoting, "The movement is on the move." That is not my quote. I read it, I saw it, and I pinched it. And I now use that a lot on social media when I see things about childhood abuse and what people, individuals, groups, organisations are doing. And I say the movement is on the move, because we are. I've never felt such energy before. I never felt this change. It is gathering momentum, and I feel it in my bones. There is so much more to do going forwards, but I think that there are too many people now that are finding their voices, that are coming together as a collective, and that are trying to drive change. This is not going backwards, this is definitely going forwards. And yes, there is a lot of resistance in some quarters, but the movement is on the move. And this is not to frighten anybody. This is just people like myself coming forwards and saying enough is enough. Look at what's happening. Look at the impact. And we have to change everything for the better. We need to use our lived experiences, the negative lived experiences, to do good for the future. And that is what is key for us changing the way that we see childhood abuse and the way that we tackle childhood abuse. So I have 4 minutes left of this particular radio show. Carol's saying, "I'm sharing, but people can't open it, Chris. Do you know why?" No, Carol, I don't know why at the moment, until I finish up and actually try and share what is going on. It says it's live. The radio show is still recording, so I really don't know what's going on at the moment. But when I finish up in a little bit, then I will try and see what's going on. But I do thank you all for listening in today. I thank you for sharing, and if you can share the broadcast afterwards, I would really appreciate it. If any one of you wants to come on the show, you can either come to Bromley and be on the show in person, or you can call in via WhatsApp, or I can call you. That's not a problem. Or if you just want to share what's gone on for you, and I can read that out and have a conversation around a topic that you may bring to my attention. So, one more thing I want to say. ICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. If you want to share your truth with an organisation or an institution that actually wants to do something with what you are saying to better protect children of today and tomorrow, please check out the Truth Project. Again, just Google it, type in Truth Project, type in ICSA, and it will automatically come up. Read around exactly what it's all about, what you're letting yourself in for, see what value you can add by sharing your lived experience, and please do come forwards if you feel it's right for you and share what's gone on for you, because ICSA is all about not highlighting, finding the failures by institutions and changing the way that institutions respond to child sexual abuse, so that we can make the journey better for victim and survivors going forwards. So please check out ICSA, IICSA, and the Truth Project, and see if it's something that you want to take part in. And if you've got any questions about any of that, please come to me and ask me, because that is part of what I see my job is as a consultant to the inquiry. So please do check that out. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can via Messenger, you can via my Facebook account or my Twitter account. So guys, I'm going to now play you the closing jingle, and I look forward to seeing you next week, and I will announce who is maybe coming on the show, because it changes depending on people's availability, and I will catch up with you all soon. So thank you for tuning in, and I'm just going to play, as I said, the closing jingle for those that are listening on the radio. So bye for now, everyone.